Hello everyone, welcome back to the Cine Bijou Podcast. As you can see, the lights are dimming, the curtain is pulled back, and we're thrilled to pick up Season 2 where we left off. From here on out, we'll be seeing you at least once a month with fresh episodes exploring the world of independent film. To keep up to date with latest episodes, you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. If you love what we're doing, the best way to help us grow is to subscribe, like, and share the show with your fellow cinephiles. We also want to hear from you, so please leave a comment on our latest episode and join the conversation. Finally, if you'd like to help keep the projector running, consider supporting us over on Patreon for exclusive rewards. Now, let's get into this month's feature.
Return to the golden age of horror. In Search of Darkness 70s.
How far along are you with the film? I know obviously you've started the pre-order campaign. How far into the production are you at the moment?
So the way we've been doing this pretty much since the get-go is we do an initial crowdfunding, and we did that on Kickstarter the first time around for the first In Search of Darkness back in 2018, and it was released in 2019. But we no longer are people. Kickstarter is kind of like Yahoo or to Google something. It's almost like a verb versus necessarily a fact. So we haven't done Kickstarter since the first two films we did, In Search of Darkness, In Search of Tomorrow. Easy for me to say. That being said, we crowdfund, and it's in two parts. So we're in the initial part where we do the initial crowdfunding to get the ball rolling and to get people excited about it, to reserve your copy, but we call it a pre-order. You're pre-ordering something. Kickstarter implies we may or may not reach our goal, and if we reach our goal, we'll get to make this project. We've been so fortunate to be able to make every project that we've crowdfunded. So that being said, I am in production. I've been in production for a couple months, more like several weeks, but really in terms of when I think about all the pre-production and all the prep work and stuff like that, I've been working on this for, I feel like, a long time. That being said, we are going to be in production. I'm all over the map here because the caffeine's kicking in. But here's the thing: we usually do this stuff around October, where we do the initial crowdfunding and the pre-order in October, and then the following October we deliver the film. We do the final crowdfunding. So everyone can, who might have missed the first one can get their name in the credits and get all the cool merch and swag and get that physical copy and stuff like that. And then they get the movie right into their inbox, right in their home, their inbox digitally, and their mailbox, their post box, and so they can put it on their wall, on their shelf. So yeah, we're in production now. I don't like to reveal any of the people because we're just getting started. I don't like to just blanket statement. I know you're very selective with your questions, but I don't like to, for those listening, I don't like to talk about what am I going to do? Am I going to do this? Am I going to do that? I really like to talk in broad terms about the era because fundamentally, as I make a long form documentary, this will be back to 70 to 79. Each year we do 10 or more movies curated within each year, larger context chapters in between. But by the end of the production experience, there's always more than I can fit in. And so I have to chop and trim and cry in terms of what makes it and what doesn't, because I want it all to be part of this, experience. So that being said, I'm just doing a lot of the talking, so I won't anticipate all your questions, but I'll just say I've really been enjoying the interviews that I've done so far. I just did 2 of them this week One, both of them were out of town. I'm in Los Angeles, so one was in Toronto and one was in St. Louis. And one was a person who is returning, who is a great person, who incredibly knowledgeable, really knows their stuff. And one person is a brand new person who is really, I would just say, reflective of this era uh, in their DNA. So it's really, really, really awesome that I'm getting a wide variety of familiar and brand new faces to talk about this era because everyone's getting a little older.
Yes, yes. And we're going to touch on that actually in one of the questions. And thank you for acknowledging that I am quite selective about what I ask, is because I don't always like to talk about the films, the era. It's your film, it's your journey, and they are a part of that and they're reflective of the story you're going to tell. Because I think we've said this before, and I've been guilty of this. Whenever watch one of your documentaries, we always say, but why didn't you throw this in and why didn't you throw that in? Like I said, I'm guilty of that. But then you watch the documentary, especially if you watch them end to end. I know that can be a chore for some people, but you watch them end to end and there is a consistent theme and there is a story and it is something that is indicative of the era, not just because of the horror films, but the times you went through, the times that we went through, because this is really these are love letters for our generation and something for younger generations to appreciate and
Hmm.
older generations too, because they were
Hmm.
there after all. But they are illustrative of those times, and whilst we would like to see other films included, that doesn't they would detract from the story. They would seem randomly inserted. So I think first of all, hats off to you for the selection you make. I know you said you cry when you want to include some things you can't, but I think you've done well in telling a story and really reflecting the times that influenced the films. So here comes the question. Having said that, and you yourself having spent since 2017 dissecting 80s and 90s horror, starting to look back now at 70s must feel like looking at the DNA or the root system of everything that followed.
Mm.
So, uh, do you anticipate or are you feeling that this latest project could change, or is it changing your view of the movies that you've covered previously?
Yeah, I mean that's a wonderful question because it's a spot on observation. Even though I haven't said anything yet, it has changed me. It's changed my perception. I wouldn't say it's changed me. I'm me. I haven't changed. Although now I'm a pod person, but no one's supposed to know because Invasion of the Body Snatchers reference. But exactly. Um, sorry, I liked your impression of Donald Sutherland there. And I've lost track of the question. What's happened is I've gone. I was a kid. I was born in '68. This is very much for a Gen. This is for everybody, but the Gen X generation sits squarely in as the target audience of this because we were around. And even though a lot of us were too young, arguably, to see these in the theater, they were all over television. It was all over pop culture. Whether you saw it in the theater or not, we all knew about Exorcist. We all knew about Jaws. We all knew about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. We all knew about Amityville Horror and The Omen. Um, and maybe we didn't know about Suspiria. Maybe we didn't know about you know, let me pick another one. Let's see. The Crazies. Maybe we knew George Romero for Dawn of the Dead and Night of the Living Dead, but probably a lot of us didn't know at the time about Martin or didn't know about the Crazies or Season of the Witch, or even none of us knew about the amusement park until semi recently. So what I'm saying in a roundabout way is that this has been a journey of discovery for me because though I never claimed or felt that I knew it all, I really did think I knew of more of the movies that came out than I actually have discovered that I just didn't. Because there was just an avalanche of films that came out when you move from the 60s to the 70s with the Hays Code disappearing and the ratings board saying you can slap a rating on whatever you want, meaning you can do whatever you want. we're just going to tell the families what they can see based on the ratings, G, PG, R, X, and so on. That meant the gloves were off for all these filmmakers to do anything that they wanted, especially in exploitation films. Um, but even, there was no self-censorship. So more filmmakers ran, to get an opportunity to make a horror film. And there was a free-for-all balance of incredibly cinematic, art house-driven, European film-inspired American and North American filmmaking, European, Italian. It's always a world cinema that I'm interested in, and selecting from. But fundamentally, there were still so many grindhouse theater, drivehouse theater, exploitation type movies where they moved from town to town and they would change the name of the movie because if it didn't do well in one town, they just rebranded for another town. That's a thing that people did, sort of the Roger Corman school of film of distribution.
Yeah.
It's a hodgepodge of stuff, and there was so much more, and frankly, it was overwhelming when I first started this project because I'm like, oh yeah, I know exactly what my top 25, 30 movies will be, and I'll just fill out the rest. But ultimately, if you do 10 years and and I aim to do 10 movies per year, on the average, that's 100 movies. And so out of this top 30 movies that, oh yeah, these are all no-brainers, you got to include these no-brainers. Then you've got 70 movies where you're just like, it's not just like 70 to 100 movies to pick from. There's like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and they all come out of the woodwork. Every time I think I've kind of tackled the comprehensive understanding of what was out there in the 70s, you get these sort of sub-genres and side films and films from other countries that I didn't even know were from other countries until I realized that everyone's dubbed, speaking a different language. It's just a wonderful free-for-all. And so I would lay at night sleepless saying, how am I going to get all this in? And I need to commit to a list because if I don't, I will never be able to get started on the whole process of this production.
I feel your
Do I sound like I'm complaining a little bit? I don't know. Maybe this is more of a therapy session
no,
for me.
David, because I feel your pain in that regard. Because when you first mentioned you were going to do this project and where we've previously spoken, I was excited and also a little overwhelmed just thinking about the films that came out of that era. When you posted it on Blue Sky, I think I mentioned you posted a standard question: what films do you think should be featured? And I think I put in a couple of titles like The Beast Must Die. And I think I also mentioned another movie that most people wouldn't have heard of called Ruby, starring the late, very great Piper Laurie, a film that to this day scares the living bejesus out of me. It is so creepy, but wonderfully shot, wonderfully acted. We saw films that were a bit more sort of human or where you face more human or psychological threats. When you look at the sad decline of Gothic horror in general and Hammer in particular, do you have any thoughts on why audiences suddenly stopped being afraid of Dracula and Frankenstein and started looking towards their neighbors and their children instead?
Right? A lot of things are going in my head. It's ultimately when you come back to horror being a reflection of the era. I mean, that's a mouthful to talk about as well. So I'll keep it very short and sweet. But we're in America, people are coming out of Vietnam. Vietnam is still raging, and then it's a very sore wound on the American psyche. People wanted to change the channel, literally, because it was on TV. Walter Cronkite was on TV, and their body counts were on TV every single night. Horrific things. Thank God, nothing like that is happening in this day and age.
I know, aren't we lucky?
I mean, it's just sad overall, and history constantly repeats itself. That being said, I think the classic boogeymen of our times that never went away in the 70s, but I think what happened was for a time they evolved because I think people did get a little tired of the greatest hits folks, Dracula, Frankenstein, the Wolfman, and I'm talking about in the 70s, early
Mhm.
70s. Um, Paul Naschy, he never let go of it because he loved these movies growing up, so he made his own versions of these things. Um, but I think because of the openness about sexuality and the direct tie between sex and horror and vampires, but now you could have Ingrid Pitt, and topless, lots of lesbian vampire movies and French, fantastique vampire films that were just any excuse to just have a treatise on sexuality and the openness of what vampirism can bring you if you go to the other side and you sell your soul literally, but you get sex and sin in exchange for eternity. Just you can't see the daylight anymore. These were interesting things that filmmakers wanted to be. But I'm a little more challenged when it comes to why was there a little more challenged as to why we were afraid of our neighbors. But that's something that happened because I think what happens is you get a subgenre that really connects, like Deliverance, The Hills Have Eyes, Race with the Devil. You
I
even
love
Rose,
that film. Yeah.
even Rosemary's Baby, which is 68.
Mhm.
Or the two key pivotal films that came out, Rosemary's Baby and Night of the Living Dead. What were those really about? That was like your neighbors are actually got a cult that's going to kill you. What's Night of the Living Dead? You walk outside the door and your beautiful countryside is now overrun by interlopers that want to kill you. Those you could draw your own conclusions about the
Mhm.
what those are analogies for. But a lot of it has to do with Manson, the Manson murders
Yeah.
as well, Vietnam, all these things. Really, you can draw a more direct line if you are in of the mind to do that. But what fundamentally, to sort of wrap up this answer, which can be a very long answer, is it comes down to box office and success and what does well. To you ask a really good question. Why did we sort of put aside the classic monsters that were now being featured in Hammer horror, and Roger Corman to a certain extent,
Mhm.
Amicus, for movies like Deliverance and Straw Dog and slashers, but it was closer to home. It wasn't the gothic horror in classic castles, and
Mhm.
England was the greatest place for it. Vincent Price movies and you know, Cry of the Banshee. I did a recent watch of that, and all I could think of was everyone was really, really cold shooting that in the English countryside
Mhm.
because you could see their breath with every single scene, and they just
Mhm.
looked cold and miserable.
Yeah.
But yeah, but it evolved. It evolved
Yeah.
to a point where there still was a variety of different types of things. There was the echo horror where the nature was going to come and get you. So you had Food of the Gods, you had Day of
Mhm.
the Animals, you had, of course, Jaws comes along and changes the game, and now everything's a shark knockoff or a piranha or
Mhm.
tentacles. Um, but hey, then you get the pinnacle at the end where you get zombies versus sharks in the ultimate showdown,
Yeah.
in Zombie. And boy, when I first saw that,
Was that Lucio Fulci? It
yeah,
was, wasn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
Fulci and boy, when I saw that, I was just like, all right, stick a fork in me. I'm done. I have seen it all, and it is glorious.
Oh, absolutely. Especially with the sort of nature turning against man movies. Again, I think environmentalism was starting to creep into the sort of public psyche, into the mainstream. So of course, you had films like I think Phase 4 was made in the early
Phase four,
70s. Day
yeah,
of the Animals, you mentioned Frogs with the late Ray Milland. And Day of the Living.
Grizzly,
Yeah.
Prophecy, The
Yes.
Swarm.
Oh, The
That's like
Swarm,
five
yeah.
S's and an
Hmm.
exclamation point, like,
Yeah, there was this real sort of again,
Warren.
there's reflection of this sort of paranoia, wasn't there, of everything, not just your neighbors and or children, but everything turning against you. We've got to be alert and be ready. Food of the
Yeah.
Gods. I'm glad you mentioned Food of the Gods. I mean, that's a film that makes me laugh and be scared both at the same time. And Marjorie Gortner, I think, just absolutely steals the
Oh
show
yeah.
every scene he gets.
It's so
So,
fun, and they, they're like an H.G. Wells story, as if that would give it any street cred, but it's really just, fabricated giant
mhm.
chickens. So it's awesome.
It was.
Well, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry to
No,
interrupt you,
no,
but
go on,
now I'm on a roll because I get excited about these movies because they're so silly.
please.
But like Night of the Lepus, like that's so
Yes.
great. Just let's build a miniature town and then we'll put bunny rabbits and make them. We'll do everything we can to make them look scary. Or you got Willard and Ben, the killer rat movies. It just on and on. Here's another thing that I think is really fun about the 70s is it was rip off central and we loved it and we were there for it. So The
Yeah.
Exorcist hits, you have 1001 possessed
Hmm.
demon exorcism style movies. Like Harry
Yeah.
hits, you get a bunch of telekinetic, knockoff movies and so on and so forth. And so
Yeah.
for as much as there is the quote unquote cream of the crop in terms of what we take a little more seriously in terms of the art of horror, there were plenty of knockoffs, and we, you and
Mhm.
I, and everyone listening are the audience for that kind of stuff. We love that. We embrace it, and we have a sense
Mhm.
of humor about it, and we go out of our way. Orca. We forgot about Orca. Did
Mhm.
we mention Orca?
I I saw Orca recently at the Forbidden Worlds Film Festival. Um, Actually, a visually impressive film to watch, but yeah, purely over the top in terms of its ridiculousness.
I cried. I cried. They were so mean. They killed
They
Orca's
were,
child. I understood. I wanted, any movie where you're rooting for the animals to kill the humans, that to me
yes.
is really fun. I have to say, the most recent Jurassic World movie, I just went because, of course, I'll see it. And
Hmm.
easily 27 minutes in, I was just like, I hope every human, except for maybe Scarlett Johansson and Mahershala Ali, but everyone
Hmm.
else, eat them.
Off
I'm
they
rooting
go.
for I'm rooting for the dinosaurs.
Absolutely. So I think so much looking back on 70s horror, and I'm gonna drop a couple of popular, well-known names of groundbreakers in here. So much of it, as much as the studio was issuing, putting money into horror films like The Exorcist, for example, um, there was a lot of scrappy, low-budget independent films that launched the careers of what we now know to be the legends or icons of horror. So I'm thinking Wes Craven, you mentioned Last House on the Left and Hills Have Eyes, Toby Hooper, the man
Hmm.
responsible for The Buzz, and let's not forget John Carpenter. I mean,
Hmm.
before they were household names, they were scrappy little filmmakers with their 16 mm cameras, and they unleashed hell in a blood spatter fest onto the big screen. How do you think, or what are your thoughts on the financial and technical limitations of 70s filmmaking in how it actually bred more creativity and gave us more raw terror? Do you think there was something very, very sort of visceral in the gritty, scrappy quality of the films that they put out?
Well, and there are so many more, but I want to throw in Argento and
Hmm.
Cronenberg and De Palma, even
Hmm.
Spielberg and you know, Friedkin, working within sort of the studio system, but making the most influential films. So, but this was an era where it was no longer tethered to the Hollywood studios with the giant cameras and the big productions. And, Cleopatra was like a giant bomb. And, they're making musicals still. And all these things are wonderful in terms of Hollywood lore and just amazing productions. But the filmmakers were all now looking to whether it was Night of the Living Dead or Easy Rider or even Bonnie and Clyde, which is essentially kind of an indie production and radical for its time. But it was literally what they were calling the counterculture, the Roger Cormans of the era. They were like, well, we could just go off for a couple days like a factory, the Andy Warhol factory, where they just want to constantly just churn out, create, be as creative as possible with as few limitations as possible, and that meant doing it themselves. And so even the bigger filmmakers were like, we just want to do this and make it ourselves. And Toby Hooper's like, I want to do a movie that's sort of an exploitation movie that's sort of inspired by Ed Gein. It wasn't called the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was called Leatherface, but they went out and they just made this scrappy movie themselves. That's legendary now, but gosh, when they made it, I know they knew that they had something special and interesting and jarring, but none of those folks who made that movie, Toby Hooper included, would ever expect it to have had the success that it did. But a lot of that goes to marketing as well. That movie was called Leatherface, but we now know, love, and cherish it and it made an incredible return on an incredible return on its investment because they changed it to Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Is it a massacre? Not really. Is it? But it is in Texas, and there is a chainsaw. So 2 out of 3 will definitely sell it. So arguably, that's also, that's like deceptive advertising. But it doesn't matter. We don't even think about that now. But if you take it literally, there's no massacre in this movie, unless you think about all the dead bodies that they're sort of piled upon in the Sawyer house. But the babysitter murders, let's change that to, Halloween. That was made on, 2 nickels rubbed together plus, very creative filmmakers behind it. And, Deborah Hill working with John Carpenter, change it to Halloween. Next thing you know, it spawns a movement. Black Christmas, arguably, and many other films did it first, but that didn't catch on. That was a little more controversial, arguably, because it took on sort of a sacred cow, of a holiday. But as soon as Halloween comes on, that's the template, that's the mold, because not only is it a holiday and a slasher, but it cost very little and it made just a gargantuan pile of money. And so every producer, whether they're an indie producer or they're a studio head, sees dollar signs and wants to jump on that trend.
Of course, absolutely. But if I remember rightly, I know I was young then, but we're of similar age. But even I remember when I started reading film magazines and newspapers and articles when I was sort of entering my teens, I remember how the obscenity laws and the need for the rating systems. I wanted to ask you about the rating system actually. With horror films in the 70s, certainly the rating system was still relatively new from what I understand, especially the R rating. It came
Yeah,
in
it was all brand new. Brand new.
And this put horror filmmakers in a sort of battlefield almost with the censors to get their films made. Because of they pushed the boundaries of gore and trauma. You mentioned rape revenge films, and we mentioned The Exorcist as well, which really gave the censors something to cry about when they went home. How do you think the legends of films and the indie filmmakers navigated or outright fought the ratings board to finally get as close to unfiltered versions of their films on the screen as possible?
Well, that was a consideration when many of them were making these films and they had to make concessions to sort of get, Tobe Hooper, infamously just poured over frame by frame by frame, as much to increase the intensity of perception versus what he actually showed. So, he's sort of playing mind games with the audience in terms of what they see versus what they think they see. The classic, Leatherface putting Marilyn, the girl, not Marilyn Burns, but putting the other girl on the meat hook. And you swear you saw that meat hook just dig into her flesh, but you never see that, and it's a very concerted, that's a very specific, definitive choice that he made. In the 70s, though, it was not the ratings, especially in America, the ratings was brand new, so it allowed even Hammer Horror. They wanted to compete. Natasha Kinski is doing full frontal nudity when she's not old enough. But oh yeah, I think she's 16 or something like that, or 17. In oh now the name's To the Daughter a Devil. What's the name of that movie? Uh, anyway, you could look it up. But they wanted to compete with all these other movies where there's much more nudity, much more sexuality. A lot of the European and Eastern European films really embraced all that kind of stuff. But the thing is, it's such a huge convoluted tale when it comes to the rating system. But rating system, you could open the regular paper and they would have sometimes theaters that were, grindhouse theaters or X-rated theaters listed just in the movie listings, until people got a little more upset about that. But I remember that, at Movie Land, there's one thing. At the Pussycat Theater, there's another thing, and it's all just in the movie listings in my paper. I remember that, and it really wasn't until the 80s that the MPAA over here got really, 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 really specific about what you can and couldn't do, and people were crying censorship yet again. But during the 70s, it was much more of a free-for-all and much more freeing for independent filmmakers. Studios were way more concerned, but you get movies like Clockwork Orange, that got made, and that is as close to an X rating with a lot of the imagery, just and the sexual violence that's in there, and of course that classically got huge pushback in the UK, but also I can't recall, and this is apologies, maybe or we could just look it up later, but I can't remember if it was banned and or if Kubrick voluntarily took it off the circuit because there were copycat murders and that kind
It
of
was the
stuff.
latter. Yeah,
Copycat crime.
it was Kubrick. It was copycat acts of violence. I think there were a couple of murders, and because by that point he was living in the UK.
Yeah.
He had moved there. I think he was living in Hertfordshire somewhere, which is very, nice estates, countryside. And he voluntarily removed that from any kind of circulation. I don't think it was
Yeah.
even available in the VHS era until sometime in the 90s.
Yeah.
And
But go ahead, please
no,
continue.
and I was going to say, and I remember distinctively reading about the reasoning behind that.
Yeah.
It's still something that's talked about today, even. So,
Yeah,
but you,
but to answer your question, like in a very concise way, I think because the ratings changed in America, filmmakers found tremendous freedom, and a lot of people saw what other people were doing and getting away with, and they said, "I want to do that too." Especially when they saw that audiences were responding to that, and it's important to know that porn films were really running rampant and a huge industry at the time. But Deep Throat was in the American lexicon in connection as a nickname of a person that didn't want to reveal their name that was connected with Watergate. And Nixon ultimately resigning, and that whole American tragedy and conspiracy and whatnot. And so because of that, people were very curious to know more about this film. And so in your average American suburb, you could actually find Deep Throat at a theater that was not too far away. And normal couples would go see that just to see what it was all about and have a spicy night, at the movies. And so the 70s was a very different time. And I think having been there, and even though I was a kid, I have memories of a lot of this stuff was a lot more permissive than it ultimately. The reins got a lot tighter. There was so much movies about Satan and the devil and cults. Just because it was fun and cool, but also because of Anton LaVey and the Church of Satan and the Manson murders, and people wanted to know more, and people wanted to see movies that were about that. But then you had the snap back in the 80s of the satanic panic and the religious right and the moral majority really sort of tightening the reins on all that stuff, including the ratings and the ratings board. If you remember, I remember Gremlin, the summer that Gremlins and Indiana Jones and the Temple of
Mhm.
Doom came out, and parents were upset because they wanted to take their kids to the cool, the cute movie with the Gremlins
Mhm.
and the Mogwais, and the next Steven Spielberg movie that was coming after E.T. It had to be child kid friendly,
Mhm.
and these things were very dark, edged, and that's when PG-13 was floated and came about. But I remember that was kind of exciting for me because I was just around 13 when that happened. So that was 84. So I was 16 years old.
84.
So,
Yeah.
so it didn't really matter to me. But so I guess my thought process now that I think about it was like I skated in under the
Yeah.
wire that I could see any movie that wasn't a R or X. But I mean, I
Mhm.
remember my dad took me to see a rated R movie, John Badham's Dracula, when I was 11 years old, and I really wanted to see Alien really badly too, and I
Mhm.
begged and pleaded, and I eventually got to see that, but my mom said I
Mhm.
was going to have nightmares, but that's a whole other story.
I just want to touch on something quickly about the rating system because I don't think casual followers of film history and technical things don't appreciate that in America. I mean, it's still true now with the NC-17, but if your film, whether it was The Exorcist or The French Connection, I mentioned Billy Friedkin there, two two instances. If those got an X rating, that was the death knell for the film. Not only because it limited your audience in terms of box office, but because the X certificate, if I recall, was reserved for pornographic movies. Whereas here in the UK, X simply meant only suitable for over 18s, which is
Yes,
in,
so
yeah.
so so they would slap an X because it was adults only, but
Hmm.
the porn films were using X as well. And so what happened was, like, Midnight Cowboy was rated X, and that was a film that was
Hmm.
at the Academy Awards,
Hmm.
celebrated. Ratso Rizzo, and you've got Dustin Hoffman and John Voight, but that's when X became triple X
Hmm.
to sort of define the difference. But NC-17 didn't come until the early 90s.
Yeah,
And,
it was
and
Henry and June was the first
Henry
film
and
to give.
June, very good. Henry and June, a Philip Kaufman movie, great film. I love Philip Kaufman, who did Invasion of the Body Snatchers
Yes.
in '78, um, and was Indiana Jones as well. He was part of that, creating that story, with Kasdan, and of course Lucas and everybody
Hmm.
else, and Spielberg.
Yep.
Um, I'm losing myself here, but the thing is, in the NC-17 wasn't an official designation, because and it's nice to have been around for these things because and had been in the film industry, because I remember very specifically they changed it because newspapers had gotten to a point where they would not advertise a movie if it was rated X. And they didn't want to put it in the newspapers. They wouldn't put it on TV for TV ads and stuff like that. They couldn't put it in a movie to, and I'm talking about the non-sexual rated X,
Yeah.
Um, so it was always pretty much, rated R, no one under 17, anyone under 17 not admitted without parent or guardian.
Hmm.
Um, uh, but then it became NC-17, and there still was sort of a back and forth as to whether or not, you put lipstick on a pig, it's still a pig. We're not going to advertise this thing. But it was to really designate the difference between a bawdy X, triple X
Hmm.
movie and an art film. You know, um, rarely do we see NC-17 films now. In fact, anything now, like a Terrifier, for example, they'll just
Hmm.
release it unrated.
Yeah.
And somehow that circumvents everything, and people will do advertising because
Hmm.
fundamentally people just want people in movie theaters, and
Yeah.
there is no such thing as newspaper listings anymore. So
No, sadly.
you don't have those gatekeepers. So I
No.
don't know, times have evolved, and and the ratings always ebb and flow in terms of
Hmm.
how intense they are for censorship versus
Yeah.
allowing filmmakers to essentially do what they want. And they would always circumvent that anyway because they release a film either rated R or PG based on the initial box office.
Hmm.
But they always get their just desserts at the end for themselves in that they not just desserts because that's sort of like a comeuppance, but they get their dessert in
Hmm.
that they can have the director's cut or the unrated cut or the extended cut or whatever they want to call it, and put all the racy stuff back in.
Hmm. But I think I want to end on this note because it's something we've touched on in previous interviews about when we lose the icons of horror. We've talked about Anthony Hickox previously, Jeffrey Burr, Tony Todd, and I think we've mentioned a few others. But when we look at 70s horror, we are losing more and more of the icons from that era. I think
Mhm.
somebody needs to put a protective bubble around John Carpenter pretty quickly because
He's doing okay. He's doing okay. I have the good fortune of having crossed paths with him multiple
Mhm.
times, and he's doing fine.
Mm.
But yes, all these people are national treasures.
They are. They are. Many of them are not with us. There are still a few, like you said, hanging in there, doing well. Now, I know with this documentary, you are going to bring in more people from different fields to give their perspective, fan perspectives, if you like, as well as expert perspectives. But in making this documentary more than the others, do you feel that there's an urgent sense of capturing living history? And how is it changing your approach to the documentary? I mean, because it's vital that you get as many first-hand accounts of these films as you possibly can for posterity. So do you feel that there is that sense of urgency with this
There is,
documentary?
and that's why a lot of people are like, "Oh, the '90s was great. I can't wait for the 2000s." But I feel like the 2000s were it's too soon. I mean, it's kind of like 15 to 20, 20 plus
Mhm.
years ago now that the 2000 the 2000 to 2010 that period of time with those films occurred. But the '70s is such a rich decade, and it's kind of a crime not to go back now that we have the opportunity. Arguably, we should have done it after we did '80s, but we there was a very large call for '90s horror from our audience, so we went there next. But now we're going to the '70s, and I'm very happy to do that because I more than ever, I've never felt like I'm doing some quote unquote important thing, in terms of a time capsule with these interviews. But I really now start to believe more and more as the people I'm talking to are definitely in their 70s and their 80s and even higher. I'm getting wonderful interviews, and their recollection is great, and their enthusiasm is absolutely wonderful and palpable. But yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people who just aren't around anymore, or they don't quite have the stamina to do this anymore, or the inclination to do this anymore, even though they enjoy being appreciated for their work from 50 plus years ago. But this is a golden decade, and so it's required. Given the work that we're doing and our trajectory and our Star Wars style going to the prequels next before the final three. I don't look at it this way because we never mapped it out. That being said, I'm proud to be going back to the '70s and capturing as many of the folks that we can who are making themselves available because it makes me very happy. And they're the ones who I've spoken to so far. I don't want to reveal names just yet. At the tail end, when we're doing the final sale, you guys will know everyone who's in it. Um, but I'm so proud of some of the people. I mean, I had a great interview yesterday with someone in St. Louis, and I knew it was going to be solid, but it was even better than I expected. And I always just walk away. I'm walking on air after a great interview because they spend so much time with me. I say, well, let's talk for an hour, hour and a half, and 2.5 hours later, we're still going. It's really, really fun. It's important to get experts to give their perspectives as well. It's good to have contemporary filmmakers who were influenced by the 70s because it was such an influential decade cinematically. I love getting them talking about what inspired them and their contemporary films. So there's a mixed bag in terms of the talent as usual. But I would say this is more of an indelible time capsule than ever, in comparison to the other ones I've done.
It's alive!
Well, that's it for this episode of Cine Bijou. Thanks for joining us as we pulled open the curtain once more, revealing the world of independent film and the creative mavericks who make it all happen. You can find this and every other episode on Spotify, YouTube, and of course, Apple Podcasts. And if you enjoyed this episode, why not leave a star review or drop us a comment? It's a small gesture, sure, but it means the world to us, and it helps fellow film fans find their way to us too. Make sure you also follow us on all the usual social media haunts, Instagram, Facebook, Threads and Blue Sky. And for reviews, features and more, why not pay us a visit at our website www.cine-bijou.co.uk. And if you are spreading the word, please don't forget to use the hashtag #SupportIndieFilm, because every share helps keep great stories in the spotlight. Until next time, keep listening, keep discovering, and as ever, let's keep that indie flame burning.